Today we're cutting through the chaos surrounding one of the biggest and, frankly, most confusing news stories of the year, the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files. Our mission here is pretty simple, to help you find the truth in the middle of all the speculation. Look, with this massive flood of unsealed documents, we're talking depositions, flight logs, you name it, and just a fire hose of stuff online, it is so easy to feel like you're completely drowning in information. Trying to figure out what's a documented fact versus what's just a wild story gone viral, it can feel impossible. So our goal today is to separate the real documented facts, that's the signal, from all the online rumors and nonsense, that's the noise. We're going to start by looking at what the files actually say, and then we'll dive into how all that information got so twisted. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so to ground ourselves in what's real, we're going straight to the source material. Buried inside all these files is a nearly 2-hour interview with Jeffrey Epstein himself. And he gives you this really startling, totally unfiltered look into how he saw the world. When he was asked about the math skills of his colleagues back at Bear Stearns in the 70s, Epstein, well, he did not mince words. His answer wasn't just blunt, it tells you so much about his whole worldview. So what's he really saying here? He's painting this picture of a financial system that isn't built on smarts, but on who you know. In his version of the story, the stock market is just a game, and it's rigged for the insiders, not the smart people. And of course, he's basically implying he was one of the only truly intelligent guys in the room. And, that cynical view didn't just stop with Wall Street. Epstein seemed to think that the exact same problem, a total lack of expertise, was happening at the highest levels of government. In his mind, the people making these huge decisions that affect all of us were just as clueless as the stockbrokers he was making fun of. I mean, this quote right here just perfectly captures his contempt. He saw world leaders not as these brilliant visionaries, but basically as winners of a popularity contest. To him, their main skill was being charming, not competent, which, again, always put him in the position of being the smartest guy around. The interview also gets into his time in prison back in 2008, and he describes the conditions in really stark detail, trying to fight back against this public idea that he had some wonderful time behind bars. He claimed he was put in the special housing unit, which he described as the place for the roughest, toughest, meanest people. He frames all of this as something done for his own protection, carefully painting this picture of himself as a victim of this really harsh system. Okay, and this is where his story really pivots from feeling sorry for himself to, well, making himself sound incredibly important. According to Epstein, the other inmates didn't care why he was in there. He claimed their main interest was something totally different. Yep, you heard that right. According to him, hardened criminals and even the prison guards cared more about getting stock tips from him than about his actual crimes. This is just a classic example of his narcissism. I mean, even in prison, he saw himself as this financial genius, the one guy with knowledge everyone desperately wanted. So that's a peek into the signal, Epstein's own words, which honestly reveal a super manipulative and self-aggrandizing personality. Now let's switch gears and talk about the noise, these wild, totally baseless conspiracy theories that have just exploded around this case. This is such a perfect example of how one tiny, out-of-context piece of information can get twisted into a gigantic, completely made-up conspiracy theory. The whole thing with Ellen DeGeneres is a textbook case of how this works. The gap between what's real and what's made up here it's just staggering. The documents literally just list her name in an index. That's it. There's no testimony, no evidence, not a single mention of her doing anything wrong, let alone that. The claim is 100% fabricated. And this shows you the simple but incredibly destructive recipe for how a lie spreads online. It starts with just a little kernel of truth, a name in a document, and then this monstrous lie gets attached to it. And because the lie is so shocking, it just spreads like wildfire. Pretty soon, millions of people start to believe the fiction is actually the fact. Now, it might be easy to just brush this off as some silly internet rumor, right? But this whole phenomenon has incredibly serious and damaging consequences for ever getting to the actual truth. It's really important to get the difference here. Misinformation is just wrong info, but disinformation, that's false information that is spread on purpose to deceive people. That cannibalism story wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate lie. And here's where the real damage happens. When the entire conversation is hijacked by these baseless, crazy accusations, it becomes impossible to have a serious discussion about the actual evidence in the files. It just creates a giant smokescreen, and that really only helps people who actually have something to hide.
And really, that's the thing to think about. Disinformation doesn't just mislead people, it creates this fog of confusion that makes it almost impossible to see what's true. And in that fog, the only people who win are the ones who benefit from the darkness.